Well, welcome, and thank you for joining us. This is the session entitled Staying Ahead of the Media Revolution, How Transport Drives the Content Ecosystem. And we really have two leaders of our transmission and transport industry here today to talk a little bit about what we're seeing at this show. You know, this is a show that really, every place you walk around, there's a revolution going on. And we think that transport really is a way to deliver how content really gets consumed in the new world order in which we live. So it's a really exciting time. I think we're going to have a good time speaking about this. And just to give a brief little intro, we have Jason Phipps. Jason is General Manager, Vice President, North America for Ciena. And as we all know, Ciena is a major supplier of optical technology and equipment for services. And we have Scott Beers. Scott is co-founder, chairman and CEO of The Switch. The Switch is a 25th anniversary this year, so congratulations, Mr. Beers. We love that. And just to kick this off a little bit, as we talked about just before, you walk around here, and you know I've been coming to this show for more years than maybe anybody would like to remember. And what we're seeing here, each time we come, is this extraordinary change in how our media business is evolving. And I think, Jason, just to open up the door a little bit, talk a little bit about how Ciena is adapting to what you're seeing here. How are you responding as a company to what really is evolving in a very much more personalized experience, customized experience, but yet never wavering on the needs to be high quality, high availability, and fully managed. Give us a little.
Yeah, so you spoke about the fact that you've been here more years than you care to count. I've been in this industry for 20 years. This is only my third year at NAB. And that's because video is becoming more and more relevant to our industry, the industry in which Ciena plays. 84% of networks will be consumed by video in the next 3 years. So this show's very, very relevant to us.
That's great.
What started as formats, video quality formats that required several hundred meg are evolving to require requirements up to 50 gig per uncompressed video stream. So Ciena's got to figure out with our innovation lab how to keep up with the evolution of that technology, how to support more raw video feeds on fiber, and how, most importantly, to reduce the cost of transmission of those video feeds.
Music to our ears. Thank you very much. Scott, you've led the charge in building a network in the past several years that is trying to be responsive to where the industry's going. Why don't you describe a little bit what that network is and how valuable it is to the media food chain?
Sure. It's hard to believe that 25 years, we started as just a local switch in New York City. Today we are in 150 stadiums across the United States, 20 gig into each stadium. We do customer control across this. We have 1,000 HDSDI connections into the network, and we're pumping bandwidth constantly daily. We do 4,500 baseball games a year, 2,700 MLS games a year, and we're seeing this dramatic change in bandwidth. I like to say we started NFL last year with 100 meg at the start of the season and a JPEG feed. By the time we did the Super Bowl, we had dual 20 gig paths going and multiple HDS uncompressed. I believe we were something like 40 to 60 gig of throughput going on for the Super Bowl.
Jason, talk a little bit about what you're observing here at the show and what type of products, maybe that you don't have presently, but where your research and development needs to focus their energy and attention on to kind of be responding to the network that Scott has built.
So I talked a little bit about the fact that the raw speeds are increasing, going up to 50 gig. Ciena is innovating in terms of being able to scale capacity on networks and throw bigger and bigger pipes at the challenge. But where a lot of our R&D is focused today is more on the agility and the intelligence in the network. So whereby we used to spend about 90% of our R&D on equipment innovation, We're now spending about 40% of our R&D on software innovation to make networks more agile. And I think you guys are doing the same.
It's a key point.
I'd like to add something to that. You know, the switch started as customer controlled. We've always been customer controlled since 1991. I'm proud to say we just were awarded a patent. We filed for it 3 years ago and got it. We are now, I want to make sure I make the statement correct, but we're patented for customer controlled of video and data, which is huge. So we have put years and years and years of money into customer control development. And you'll see there's more and more of this coming along. I think we all remember the days that we used to go shopping. Now we go to Amazon. You know, we used to put our hand in the air and now we Uber. You know, same with video. Our customers are banging away and doing it themselves. Many pipes, many feeds, thousands a day of these type of things going on that we're not even aware of.
Scott, you have a product that we call home runs.
Yeah, that's the.
And why don't you describe what that is, but as importantly,
Yep.
how that really creates a value proposition for current business and
Yep.
where it's going.
Well, this couldn't happen without these big data pipes that, you know, we get from Net Insight, puts our equipment on it, and Ciena, who gives the pipes. We have 612 10 gig waves in our network now. But what's happening with these home runs is, I think it's the biggest game changer in our industry. It started where everybody started. For those of you who don't know what home runs is, it's the taking of the cameras all the way back and cutting the show from your home studio versus doing it on site. We're seeing this more and more with more and more of the traditional broadcasters out there. But why do I think it's a game changer? I think it's a game changer because we're all looking at how to customize our programming. You can't take one linear feed and send it out to 50 distribution platforms. You got to start to customize this. And with over the top, once you start bringing these home runs back or all the individual cameras, we can start customizing television for each one of you. So once it's back, I can stream it back out and you can come at it over the top. So I can make a show just for you, or you can make a show and cut the camera angles. Think about it for fantasy sports. You could go on and register fantasy sports and just get the camera angles of the players who you registered. This is where we're going, individual programming per person. And over the top gives you that ability to have that one-on-one dialogue. Big bandwidth, but we have that capability.
Jason, as a transport provider, supply chain provider of transport, how do you differentiate yourself? I think one of the fears that some people do in observing what transport is, they try to commoditize how bits are moved around networks. How can you, as a leader at Ciena, differentiate yourself and make sure that all of this isn't commoditized because there's value in how these bits are being transported?
Unfortunately, I think the hardware will ultimately get commoditized. You know, we're moving to SDN and NFV and white box phenomena. So I think eventually the equipment does get commoditized. One way for us to stay ahead of that commoditization is to make sure we're innovating. We right now are the leaders in supporting over 18 terabits of capacity on a single pair of fiber. If fiber is precious and you're driving these home runs, those are not cheap. We got to try and put as much bandwidth as we possibly can on those home runs. We can support, a camera can capture about 24 terabits of data over about a 4 to 6 hour period of time. We can move that data in 3 seconds over our equipment. Or we can support 9,600 simultaneous cameras feeding gig-E links at the same time on a pair of fiber. So the key to us on the hardware side is to stay in front of our competitors to make sure we don't get commoditized with innovation, but it's going to be all about the software going forward.
And again, it points to Scott and the patent that he has. I can kind of recall the company I used to work for when Scott Beers came into the early 1990s at a meeting, and he basically asked the question, how come we don't provision video like we make a telephone call? And he kind of coined the phrase video dial tone, and it's really been used since then. And that was a guiding principle that I think existed back in the early 1990s, and it's a guiding principle today. Put the power and control in the hands of the customer and make sure they've got an elegant system with which to do that. And I think that's what we're seeing. These software tools are really the enabler that drives customers to drive their applications. I don't know if you have any comments
I mean,
there.
I think it's a really good point. So I keep talking about the software is important. Let me, put it in context. You guys do a lot of distribution of live sporting events. They're live for a period of time, and then they go down. Yet you've got all that stranded capital and investment sitting there that could be utilized for something else. So how do you make that more dynamic, more flexible, more on demand? Like Scott, you said, as dial tone. When I pick up the phone, I want to get billed, but when I put it down, I want the billing to stop.
Amen, and that's been one of those guiding principles that I think Scott and our company is doing today. You mentioned distribution, and I think we blur often the term distribution and contribution.
Correct.
And Scott, why don't you give us a little bit of wake-up call to understand what the differences are and how each party can play in that space?
Sure. I think a lot of what you see here at the show is distribution. There's really three players in the fiber world who are in the contribution side. It's us, Level 3, AT&T Global Video Services. Through decades, you've seen the distribution platforms grow exponentially. You haven't seen that in the contribution side. The best way to think of it is, we're the B2B, and they're the retail side, the distribution side. So we bring all the contribution. So the contribution side has very critical requirements. Low latency, low jitter. It must be backed up, redundant, as much as you can. Distribution, we all watch our cable fail or resend packets, et cetera. Try that during the Super Bowl on a contribution side and your head will be cut off. We just can't tolerate it. So contribution's a different animal. We need as good and high a quality as fast as we can back to the program producer for them to distribute and do what they need to do.
Scott will say this, I think the Switch probably is the single largest customer that buys 10 gigabit wavelength services.
Yeah, in the world.
And how many roughly do you have?
Last I think it was 612 10 gig waves.
So just think about that, 612 10 gig waves. We're paying for full-time service, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But frankly, we're not using it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Again, I'm looking to Scott here. Where do you see the hopeful opportunities that exist so that maybe we could find flexible pricing models so that we're not paying for unutilized bandwidth when it's not needed?
Right. We have started dialogues with the carriers to develop. We want it as part of our software. Just like you pick bandwidth for us and you book something on us, we want the same thing from the carriers. So we would like burstable last miles. Let us idle, let us sit at a lower bit rate, but you've got a sporting event going on for a weekend, let us burst it up, use it for the weekend, burst it back down. So we're looking for burstable last miles. We spend tens of millions of dollars a year on fiber, so we're pushing this hard. I think it'll be one of the better things for our industry.
Jason, what keeps you up at night?
Besides me?
My four kids.
That's good. That's a good one. That'll keep you up for, it's only the first 30 years that are tough. But seriously, are there technologies that concern you? Are there certain companies that concern you? Are there security and software vulnerabilities that concern you? What are the things that you try to make sure that your team is managing to minimize some of those risks?
Wow, that's a big question.
Hey, look, I'm winging it here, man.
Yeah, that's a big question. So what keeps me up at night? It's the satisfaction of our customer base that keeps me up at night. I'm a very passionate person. My team's very passionate. People do business with Ciena because of our culture. We do business with people. We love the Switch as a partner and a customer. Part of it's that you guys distribute sports, and I love sports, and so do my kids. But you're a great customer, great show. What keeps me up at night is that we can stay in the game, maintain leadership in a commoditized world, and maintain our culture and spirit.
That's a great answer. Scott, what keeps you up at night besides me?
Well, I mean, I think everybody here knows, we're in the live sports or we're in the live television business. We all stay up at night, don't we? So it's, we try to minimize that. You know, I have a philosophy in our company that I keep saying, which is, you know, we're the new guys on the block. And you got to remember, a year ago we didn't even do NFL. Now we do a good chunk of it. So it's the idea that you get in line in our business, and you're in the back of the line. And this guy who's in the front of the line, as soon as he screws up, he goes to the back of the line, and you move up, and you keep moving up as this guy screws up. When you finally get to that position, you better hold on to it. And so we spend and overbuild and overdesign. We do nothing in our network that isn't 1+1. So when you buy a gig, you get two. And they're diverse routes all the way from first mile to last mile. And they're self-healing. So we don't have the failures that are very common in the other contribution. So that side is really put us on the map.
You know, Jason talked about customers and how you value your customers. Maybe Scott, just give the audience a little glimpse of some of the customers that your company has, our company has, and as importantly, some examples of what we're doing and what we're seeing, how they're changing their workflow that drives their business differently. We're a video company historically. We're really evolving to be a data and Ethernet company, and maybe you could just share a little bit of those examples.
I think the better way of, without going into specifics of what we do for each client, I don't think that's right or fair. But let's talk about their workflows. I talk about home runs, and home runs starts with an economic model that you do it because it saves you a lot of money. But really, when you think about it, it's all the assets that you get, which is really becoming the exciting and the game changer. All of those camera angles back. So you have your E-games, let's just say it's high school basketball. That's your E-game. A-game being Super Bowl or Oscars or something else. They're moving together. The E-games, they're doing all the cameras and running back. The A-games, you're taking big data pipes and cutting down on their EVS operators and leaving them home. Or their graphics people are staying home, or they're not editing on site. It's all being run back. So it's compressing. It's starting to meet in the middle. And I think that's a very exciting part of our business is how the workflow is changing. And that's why the pipes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
You know, we read a lot about some of the up and coming kinds of applications that are out there. Virtual reality is something we read a little bit about. We understand enough to see how maybe we play in that space. E-sports, electronic sports, and gaming. Those are things that we are reading a lot about that are really the growth engines of bandwidth services going forward, and the need to be high quality and low latency. I'll look to Scott first and then maybe Jason for some of your comments.
True, all of these new things, they need bigger bandwidth, low latency, fast and accurate, and protected. You know, one of the things, you know, I came from the video side of the world, and one of the biggest things I learned coming into the data side of the world is data is not data. You know, I always thought video was video, and then data comes in, how am I gonna compete with these big data companies? Not true. You know, you get into these MPLS worlds, or you get into, you know, we do dedicated Ethernet pipes that are 1+1 protected and are very, you know, stable. And this is, you know, when you get into sports and you're connecting 8 trucks going around at a multi-point to multi-point as they exchange files, it's, you know, it's got to be true and it's got to be accurate just as much as video does, if not more.
So as an optical provider of equipment, services, solutions, how do you see Ciena adapting to some of these types of bandwidth consumed activities and applications? Where does Ciena play in that next generation of content consumption?
Yeah, let me talk first. I think it was the prior question about what do we see in change in applications and dynamics in the marketplace. 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, 95% of our bandwidth was consumed by traditional carriers. The AT&Ts, the Verizons, the BTs, Vodafones of the world were consuming the bandwidth that was mostly for voice and data, predominantly data at the time, moving ones and zeros around for backup and recovery services. This year, about 60% of our bandwidth is consumed by the traditional carriers, 40% by non-traditional. So let me talk about some of those non-traditional phenomena right now, even beyond video. The emergence of cloud computing,
Yep.
Amazon, Google, the war front, the battlefront with them and Microsoft is taking place. They're throwing terabits and terabits of capacity, facilities, power, and space at the problem. But that's a huge, huge driver of bandwidth growth in our industry, is the phenomenon of cloud computing. Gaming is a big one.
Yep.
We are doing business directly with gaming companies and with or through some of our service provider customers with gaming companies. When I get into video, we always think about ESPN and NBC and sports venues and stuff. How about the church?
Yep.
The church I go to, North Point Church in Atlanta, is one of the biggest broadcasters in all of the Southeast. So things are changing. It's not all about the NBA, NHL, your marquee sports anymore. It doesn't even have to be about sports.
Nope.
It can be any live venue that we're broadcasting today. So lots of change.
Yep, good point. So one question I have is the public internet. 5 years from today, what is the public internet's capability, capacity than it is today? Where do you see the public internet as a technology, as a transport delivery service, and how much better or worse does it get?
The problem is bandwidth growth is outpacing what the public internet can provide, so it will fail. It can be used for certain applications, texting, emails from the family. I mean, there'll be some serviceability of the public internet, but this can be more about custom networks that are being built specific for the applications. There's got to be, software intelligence built into how the applications are being carried. It can't be best effort over the internet, just from a latency and delivery and customer experience perspective, but also we haven't really dove into the whole security
That's right.
phenomenon, is the public internet in and of itself is not very secure. And so if you want to protect your data at all, the worst thing you can do with it is stick it over a public internet routed infrastructure.
Do you think today we're bandwidth constrained? Is there too much in the wrong places, not enough in the places we need it, or in general, is there a gap?
Yeah, we've got huge gaps in North America. Most of it's on the access side, not necessarily in core and metro, although we are getting to a core problem where you've got one or two monopolies, sitting in the core. But we've got an access problem in the United States today. We're behind 60% of the other, countries today in terms of access to the household. So it's a huge problem. Bandwidth growth year on year right now is between 35 and 40% year on year. That's the bandwidth growth in networks. The access networks are only evolving at about 25% per year in the United States. The core is actually evolving at about the same pace, about 40% per year. But we've got a huge bandwidth problem. There's no glut, especially in the access. I might add that bandwidth is growing 40%, so Ciena's stock multiple ought to be really high. The problem is pricing's compressing almost as fast as bandwidth is growing. So if bandwidth's growing 40%, but we're able to compress the price through technology innovation by 30 to 35%, our top line is only growing 8 to 10%.
Scott, where do you see companies like the Switch in 5 years? We talked a little bit about some of the new applications, whether it's virtual reality, whether it's esports, the value of rich private networks.
Well, I think it's going to, I go back, I think over the top is really going to drive this because of the one-on-one customization you can have with each individual viewer. We already see this, 5 years ago, you might do a sporting event, you might take 1 or 2 feeds out. We're averaging probably 11 feeds per game now. Some of them could be in the 20s or 30 separate feeds coming out of a particular game. We've got home run discussions of 70, 80 cameras coming out of each venue. So it's going to go up. Yes, the clients might, but our desire for having all of these camera angles and all of the different feeds coming back is going up dramatically. So I see us going to 100 gig quickly, and I see it all the way to the last and first miles. very quickly.
We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'd love to, throw it out to the audience. If you have any questions, comments, want to throw stones at somebody, don't be shy. Mark, you're never shy. Come on, man.
Thanks, Rich, for putting me on the spot. So I guess I will ask a question of Jason. How is the North American market evolving with the availability of additional fiber to get to all the places we need to get to?
So we talked about is the bandwidth, and I'll equate bandwidth this time to fiber. Is the bandwidth in the right locations?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Today it's not. I mean, we're driving fiber like crazy. There's a huge government program called the Broadband Stimulus that's taken fiber into rural areas and servicing double wides with fiber connections. Yet you can't go into a multi-tenant facility in downtown Atlanta and get a fiber feed.
Yep.
So yes, there's lots of fiber being built today, not all to the right locations. It is becoming less and less expensive to actually shoot fiber through conduit, but the fiber itself is not getting less expensive. There is not commoditization and price compression in glass. So fiber is still quite expensive to lay down. The operating cost of laying it down has come down some. But there's all kinds of right-of-ways that you need to negotiate, all kinds of legal hurdles you need to get through, not just to enter a building or to get onto a power pole or whatever the case may be. There's all kinds of constraints to get the bandwidth where it needs to be today. So we're highly challenged in North America to get the bandwidth where it needs to be, especially on the access. I'll go back to the core. I do think we've got a monopoly problem in the core today. There's 2 or 3 big carriers that really made substantial builds a number of years ago, and no one else has been able to replicate what they've been able to do. So there's a pretty significant monopoly in the core today.